This part is like the nuance part. It's the part where you get to learn how to use these skills in practice with your clients. So to review, there's the spirit of MI, motivational interviewing. It's more than a set of techniques, which is what we learned last time, but it's based on these three key elements. We have autonomy versus authority, collaboration versus confrontation, evocation versus imposition. So all of these things working together. So to go into a little bit more detail, and the acronym for that is ACE. So if you're trying to remember that, it's ACE. So we're going to work on autonomy. Clinicians affirm and support the client's self-determination. We're basically looking to take the responsibility and give it to the client, as opposed to authority. Often it's, I know what's going on. This is the way you need to do that. So the responsibility for change is in the clinicians in an authority place, but we want autonomy. So we really want the client to own this, which is really interesting. I know this is something that I had to change my viewpoint, especially when I first started coaching. I noticed that I took responsibility a lot if the client changed. If the client changed, I felt good. If the client didn't change, I felt bad. And I realized I was taking responsibility and ownership for their change. So it was a really big shift for me when I realized that it's actually up to them. I can be their cheerleader. I can help them change, but I can't do it for them. So that in itself makes the job a lot easier. So you don't go home with so many bad days. All right, now we're going to talk about collaboration. So we want to work together with our clients. We're not going to tell them what to do, but we're going to sit beside them, help them through the whole process. We're going to focus is on exploration and support. The contrary would be confrontation. They also call this the righting reflex. So I'm right, I know what to do. And often you can think about this in terms of like when you're a teacher, you're like, okay, so I know what to do and I'm going to just tell you. And it's so hard to kind of pull back and let them know that whatever they're saying is their reality. So whether you agree with it or not is the difference. So we want to hold back from that confrontation and really just let them guide the process. If you disagree, you just reflect what they say and then kind of work from there. So it was a really big shift for me when I started realizing that. And the evocation. So the place of motivation is not from you. You don't want to give them your motivation. You just want to carefully craft your questions so that they pull their motivation from within. Imposition is when you feel like you have all the answers and you're going to give your client those answers and then they will figure it out. You'll enlighten the client so that they will want to change. So instead of the imposition, you want to have that change come from within your kiddo. So, in review, these are the skills. The skills are the ORs, the open-ended questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summaries or paraphrasing. So using those skills, you're going to be able to help your student go through all the changes and come up with that internal motivation. Okay, so now we have the 4 processes of MI. So it all starts down from engaging. You want to engage, establish a working relationship with your client. You're going to then focus on what you're going to work on, pick a direction, and then move towards that direction. Again, you're going to evoke from the participant the way to change, and then you're going to have a plan, your commitment and action to that plan. To go into a little bit more detail, we're going to start with engaging. So how do you engage? Well, I'm sure a lot of you are really, or all of you are really good at engaging. That's always the first thing in order to get what we call the buy-in. So how do you get to know them? Well, you ask about them. You spend the whole first session or even more, because we know some clients really need extra time on that. We learn about what's important to your client. Get to know their siblings' names, their friends, even their pets. what sports, hobbies, what kind of music they like, their activities. I know this was something that's hard for me. I can't remember any of these details. So I take really detailed notes so that right then and there, when I hear the dog bark, I kind of scroll up and I go, oh, how's Casey? How's Casey doing? And you kind of try to remember those details because they mean a lot to your kiddo. And I'm still working on that one, but I find that taking those notes really helps. And then accepting feelings. So it's interesting, as all these pieces come out of motivational interviewing, you'll find that they're all interwoven. So engaging is going to use the skill of accepting feelings or reflective listening. All right, the next step. So once you've engaged, once you really have a relationship with your client, then you're going to start focusing their attention. So developing an understanding of what's important to them, and you're going to kind of figure out 1 to 3 goals to work towards. You want to let your client lead you on that one. I know when I was working, when I did a lot more student coaching, I would always meet with the parent and figure out what they wanted, but then try to meet with the student on their own, so that when I asked the student, what's important to you? Where do you, what was the question I would ask? I would ask, if you could work on one thing that would make your life easier, what would it be? And the students really liked that because they would realize, oh, if I just kind of figured this piece out in my life, life would be easier. I would feel better in my own life. Of course, I would use the information that the parents gave me, but I really wanted the motivation to come from the student. So that was the way I kind of worked out. So making mom happy, or mom and dad, and the client. And I would say 9 times out of 10, maybe even higher, the student really wanted to focus just on what mom and dad said. It was just easier to come out when mom and dad weren't around. So one of the ways you can focus a client is to make an agenda map. So this is actually a really cool strategy. So you take bubbles. I couldn't make bubbles because I can only make text puzzles. So these are all rectangles, but you make a bubble sheet and you kind of say to your kiddo, all right, so what are some of the things that we could work on? Or what are some things that students do who are successful? Or what are the areas that you think are helpful? You just kind of write down all the things that a student might be interested in learning, or all the things that are helpful for a student. And then sometimes, so I have test taking anxiety down here. This might be something that you would want to work on, not that's actually helpful. But first you kind of lay out all these bubbles, and then, and this is the best kind of question, I always ask, so what are you really good at? They have all these bubbles out, and the first thing you're asking is what they're good at. And they can always tell you something like, oh yeah, I'm really good at like test taking. Awesome. And then you might ask the next question, which would be, so what do you think would be helpful for you to feel better in school, or for you to do better in school, depending upon where their thoughts are. And I find that they're so much more open once you've asked for what they're good at first. So this is a really powerful tool and part of motivational interviewing. All right, so now we have a focus. We're going to move on to evoking. We're going to collect the students' ideas for change. We're going to work on them having the motivation, not from us. And we're also going to have your student, if they can, develop an argument for change for themselves. I often hear things like, well, I should really write an agenda. And I've started to make should an illegal word. So I won't let students use the word should. I go, you just should yourself. And that always gets a little giggle. And so if you take out the word should and you want to use the word agenda, so instead of I should write an agenda, use a different word. How can you actually, what would be helpful? Why should you write an agenda? And so then they start to go, well, I guess it would make it easier for me to remember homework if I wrote an agenda. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. It would make it easier. Or I would feel less anxious if I wrote an agenda because I would know what to do. So if you take the word should out, then you're actually helping them find that motivation for change. That is a stronger connection than should. Because I don't know about you, but when I hear the word should, I almost get the finger out. Like, you should do this. It almost feels like a command or something that, like, when you feel somebody's being naughty or somebody's telling you what to do. So when a student starts to develop that motivation, they don't want to use the word should. And then when you're trying to find motivation, I often ask, like, okay, so what have you already tried? What went well with that method? So when you're trying to think of somebody, I'm trying to think of an example. What have you already tried? Well, I just remember. So if we're again working on, I don't want to use an agenda, a student might be like, well, I just remember. Or I look on Google Classroom and that's enough. And then, so again, the first question, I always try to make it positive. Well, what goes well with that method? What do you like about that? And they'll say something like, well, it's easy. I don't have to write anything down. And then you go, oh, okay, that's awesome. It's easier. You don't have to write anything down. That makes life easier. But, what would you change about that? What do does it always work? How do, what are the downsides of just remembering or just using Google Classroom? And that's when you might get them to be able to say, well, yes, sometimes I forget assignments. And then you use that. Oh, okay. So when you forget assignments, how does that feel inside, or what goes through you? And they go, oh, my mom, she hits the roof, or, I feel really bad, or like I get anxious when I'm in school and I'm afraid the teacher's going to call on me. So we start leaning into those feelings after I've asked the positives and then the negatives. And then again, I'm more likely to get a real answer. Okay, so now that we've brought out our motivation for change, we're going to talk about planning. So the commitment to action. So we're going to encompass both commitments to change and a formula for specific plan of action. So you really want to start fine-tuning their language. You want to have a sharp ear for, yes, clients' own solutions, and then their autonomy for making those decisions. So those that change talk you want to start listening to. So for example, if a student says something like, yeah, I'll probably do it after dinner. That doesn't really sound like a really strong change talk. So you want to start going, oh, probably. So, what would make you not do that? Or what would make it hard? And they're like, oh, well, after dinner, my sister's always watching TV, and then, I want to watch TV with her. Oh, okay. So I'm wondering, if that's, if you still like that idea. And they go, oh, well, I guess that's not. So maybe I'll do it before dinner. And so if you listen to the change talk, we went from, I probably will do it after dinner, to, no, you know what, I'm going to do it before dinner. And when you hear that change talk, you want to repeat it back to them so that you can further emphasize it. Another thing I also like to do is when we're talking about change talk and making commitments to plan, sometimes we have a lot of suggestions out on the table. And maybe I'll say to a student something like, well, what are you ready, willing, and able to do? So you're really engaging what they want to do, but what they feel like they can do. So another way to shore that up is I'll say, well, what are you ready to do for just 1 week? Because a student might be willing to write in a journal or write an agenda, or do something like a tiny study habit, which is study for 5 minutes every single night. But when they think about sustaining that over the course of a year, it feels impossible. So what I've started to do is dial it way back and say, well, what are you going to do? What are you ready to do for just 1 week? And after that 1 week, we'll revisit it and see if it works. If it works, we can keep it. And if it doesn't work, we can change it. And they usually sign up for something like that. It's so much more sustainable. Okay, so now these are all the steps to change, all the stages for change. So in the beginning at top, this is where we're not interested in change at all. This is, I don't have a problem, I'm absolutely fine. Then we'll go to the contemplation. Well, okay, I guess sometimes I forget some of my homework, but that's okay. Then we might go to preparation. Preparation is, yeah, I guess I should write in an agenda. Um, it might be helpful. And then the action is really actually doing it, writing in that agenda on a daily basis. And then we have maintenance. So this is where we can see it sustained over time. And then I've liked this because it goes to relapse. In my experience, almost all clients, because I work with a lot of adults, so even the adults relapse and then they feel like garbage. And you're like, oh, it didn't work. But if we kind of build in that it's okay, that this is actually a normal pattern of change, that we get really, really good, we sustain, and then sometimes we mess up, we forget, something happens. So, for example, I've had clients say they were going to go for a walk every single day, and then all of a sudden there's a hurricane. So then they stop doing it because there was a hurricane, and then they forget. So sometimes life gets in the way and then they start to beat themselves up. So if you teach them that that's actually the way the brain works, the brain actually forgets. And then when you start remembering, it actually shores up that neural pathway. It's actually they're much happier to know that that's a normal part of change. And then I actually start talking about the wagon. So I'll say something like, when you are driving a wagon, you are driving towards that goal. And so you're on the wagon, you're like, okay, I'm going to meet my goal. I'm going to achieve this thing. And then you fall off the wagon. Something happens that derails you and you forget. What most people do is they notice they've got their cuts and bruises, and then they start to beat themselves up. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. I can't believe I did that again. I'm awful. I'm never going to be able to do this. I'm never going to be able to make this change. And they beat themselves up. And then they dust themselves off. They get back on the wagon and they start going towards their goal. Well, I'll ask clients, I'm like, well, what kind of shape are you in when you beat yourself up and then you get back on the wagon? And they all say the same thing. They're like, oh, not really good shape. I go, well, what about if you did something like this? You're going towards your goal, you fall off the wagon, you notice your scrapes and bruises, you kind of dust yourself off, and you get back on that wagon and you start looking towards meeting your goal. What kind of shape are you going to be in? And they all say the same thing. They go, oh, be in better shape. Well, who's in better shape to meet their goal? The person who doesn't beat themselves up for falling off the wagon. So if you understand that it's a normal part of the process, it's really helpful to get back on that wagon and meet your goal without. Did I hear a question?
Yeah, but I was trying to time it perfectly, so I didn't cut you off, but I did.
That's okay. What's up?
I think this is awesome. It makes me think about, we're coaching clients to be their own coach in a way. And you can always get an interesting response from clients, when you say, how, it's like the double standard idea of how would you say this to a friend, right? Like if you were getting back on the wagon, what would you tell a friend? And most people, are going to be, say it softly and say it kindly. And, okay, so, you say, you're an exception though, you're held to a different standard or whatever. And sometimes that will kind of get them to be like, oh yeah. So really coaching them to coach themselves in a respectful, self-compassionate way can really affect, it gives like the resulting emotions less power if you're using the, if you're not interpreting it as negatively.
That's a great point. Thank you so much for adding that, Matt.
Sure.
I appreciate that. I also wanted to point out I like this illustration because if you notice in the front, there are those grooves in the track. So I also talk about like laying the foundation, those neural pathways. So the more you do this, you see how like the tracks, there's a couple different tracks there, but the more, if you keep practicing the same track, you're going to wear out deeper grooves, and then the habit is going to become more automatic. So I like this analogy or this picture to teach that analogy a lot. And because most people, when they think that they're going to have this new habit, they're like, I'm going to be expert right away. But of course, that doesn't happen. And then what happens is they look like this after they've fallen off, and there's a lot of shame and beating up, and it's very sad. So, and I love this. So here's our open-ended question. Oh, you're back on the wagon. Tell me more about how you plan to stay on it. So feel free to use any of these illustrations if they help you use or illustrate your point at some point in the future. Okay, so now we've talked about our ORs, we talked about the different parts of motivational interviewing, but I really want to get into eliciting change talk because this is where the magic happens. So I have a few examples of our change talk. So we're going to ask evocative questions. Well, we've talked about this one, but it bears repeating. So sometimes when I'm opening up a session, I'll say something like, what would make this session successful to you? And then they kind of sit up straight and they're like, oh, you mean you're not going to use your own agenda? You're going to actually listen to me. So they kind of like that. It's really cool. Or what do you want to get out of this session? Is really helpful, especially folks who like to drive the bus, like this kind of talk so that they can really be heard and get more out of the session that they wanted to. Oh, and please feel free to stop me and ask questions or add comments at any time, because I know I'm just kind of giving a lot of information, but I know it's a lot to take in. So feel free to stop me at any point. So our next strategy is exploring decision balance. So first you ask the good things about the status quo, and then you ask about the not so good things. So an example of this would be, what would happen if you didn't do that homework? So for example, if I had a student just this week who had a missing assignment. Now this kiddo never has missing assignments, so she's kind of a different kind of kid. And she's like, she's like, yeah, I really just don't feel like doing it. I was like, oh, okay, here's my chance to use my motivational interviewing skills, because I'm not used to kids saying that they don't want to do things. And so I was like, okay, well, what would happen if you didn't do that math assignment? She's like, well, I guess I wouldn't get the points, so my grade would be lower, and I guess I wouldn't do as well on the quiz. I said, okay. Fair enough. I said, and what do you think would happen if you did do that? She's like, well, I get the points back and I'd probably do better on the test. And I said, okay. And so then I let her decide. As she understood now that there are, the two consequences, she was able to make an informed decision. That's an example of decision balance. And again, it took a little while for me to get over the fact of exploring the bad part, like what we consider the negative behavior. It took me a while, but I find that the kids are really good at working with this. It wasn't as scary as I thought. Okay, asking for elaboration. So when a change talk theme emerges, ask for more details. In what ways? Tell me more. What does it look like? So for an example like this, I can't, if you find an assignment and somebody says, yeah, I can't do that assignment, instead of jumping down their throat or telling them, yeah, you can say something as really simple as, yeah, tell me more about that. And then I always say, mic drop, just let the silence go, and then they'll fill in the silence. And then you might find out like, oh, it's too late. I can't do, my teacher doesn't let us do assignments that are more than 3 days late, or something about, that's a lab that I can't make up, or whatever it might be. But it adds a nice flow to to your session. Okay, so ask for examples. When change talk theme emerges, ask for specific examples. When was the last time that happened? Give me an example. So for an example, like a research project. So there's a research project coming up, And you might go back and say something like, oh, well, how did the last research project go? Like, what did you do then? This might be for an example of a kid who wants to wait to the very last minute to do a project. He doesn't think he has to go very far or start in advance. So you might say something like that. And then that's when you'll get into like, oh yeah, it didn't go so well. I guess it was actually really stressful. Oh, tell me more about that. Oh, well, I waited till the night before, and they might give like 15,000 reasons why, but I waited the night before and it was really stressful. And I was up till like 3 a.m. My mom was really pissed, and then I didn't do really well on that homework. So if you go back and ask the child to elicit the examples, then you'll find, he'll find the motivation. Like, oh, I guess I don't want to do that again. That was really, that sucked. So I'm gonna switch that up. Okay, so looking forward, ask what may happen if things continue in this status quo. So if you said something like, so maybe you have a kiddo who doesn't feel like they need to study. So you might say something like, all right, well, what would happen if you just kept not studying? What do you think would happen? You can actually ask them, get them to like kind of think a little bit like, oh, well, maybe I won't do well in school, and maybe my GPA won't be high enough, and then maybe I won't be able to get into the college that I really want. Oh, okay. So you just kind of ask questions and accept the answers. You can also try the miracle question. If you were 100% successful in making these changes you want, what would be different? So if we're talking about studying once again, so if I studied, and perhaps maybe we're even implementing the tiny study habit, which is studying 5 times a day, or 5 minutes a day, no matter whether you have a test or not, and you just did that, and you were 100% successful, what do you think would happen down the line? Well, I guess it would be easier to remember what was on the test, or when the test came, I guess I wouldn't have to study that much. Oh, okay, that makes sense. And what else? Oh, I guess actually it'd be easier in class to participate. I would know what's going on. Oh, if you know what's going on, how will class be for you? I guess class would be more pleasant, or not as anxious. I wouldn't be as anxious in class because I would know what's going on. Oh, okay, just kind of accepting what's going on. And then of course how would your life be like 5 years from now if you did either one way or the other, the positive or the negative? And you can have them go down the line of where they are 5 years from now. And it's the questions are nice change talk questions. Okay, so query extremes. What is the worst things that might happen if you don't make this change? So now you can go down the rabbit hole. You can talk about something like going to bed. So let's say some kids have a hard time getting to bed at a reasonable hour. So what would be the worst thing that would happen if you don't make this change? If you don't start going to bed at a reasonable hour? I mean, that you can go down the rabbit hole with this one. Well, I guess I would be really tired a lot, and then maybe I would be having a hard time focusing in school. Maybe I wouldn't, I wouldn't do as well in my sports, or maybe I would just get so tired I might even get sick. And then you can do the opposite. What are the best things that might happen if you do make this change? Well, if I learn to get to sleep at a regular hour, I'll have more energy, I'll be healthier, I can be able to focus, you can go down that. So you can explore both extremes. Typically, I know this is the way this one's listed, but typically I would actually, I guess you can do it either way. I was going to say I would flip it, but no, you can do it either way. But empowering the child so that he can make the suggestions. So, okay, so use change rulers. So this was in the video. I tried to share this video, but I shared the wrong one because David had recently shared out a ruler video. David, I don't know if you can share that with everybody again, because I know Kate was not on that text the first time you shared it. So if you could either do everybody or just Kate, I think that would be really helpful. I tried to find it, but I couldn't find it.
Yeah, I'll look for it.
Awesome. So the change ruler is ask on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it for you to change? Let's say the specific target behavior, which let's use going to bed on time. So how important is it for you to change going to bed on time or at a reasonable hour, where 1 is not important at all and 10 is extremely important to you? So they might say 5. Okay, so why are you at a 5 and not a 3 or a 4? And when you ask the question that way, you might elicit more change talk. So, well, I'm at a 5 because I think it's important, but it's not but it's not a 3 or 4. It's important because I really am tired in class and I'm falling asleep. So it is important. If it was a 3 or 4, then that, then I wouldn't think that was important at all. So it's definitely more like a 5, not a 3. So now you're bringing up reasons like, oh yeah, I really do need to stay awake in class. So that is important to me. Does that make sense? Okay, so here's the readiness ruler. So this is just an example of one of them. So if your student says they're anywhere between a 1 to 3, that means they're just not ready at all. So you can ask questions like, I think this is supposed to say, what would have to happen for you to consider change? So if you're not willing to change at all, you're saying you're 1 to 3, and then you could follow up that question with like, oh, yeah, okay, so what would have to happen in order for you to change? If we're using the sleep example, it might be something like, I would have to fall asleep behind the wheel if you have a driver, or I would have to start doing badly in sports if you have a kid on the football team. So you're almost asking for extremes in order to change behavior. And then, the follow-up question with that would be like, oh, so you'd like to wait until you get in an accident, or, oh, so you want to wait till you're doing poorly in football. And that gives the kid a chance to go, oh yeah, I really don't want to do that. If your kiddo's at a 4 or 6, 4 through 6, your question might be, what might be the next step? So this is not, I'm going to change. This is just, I'm going to set you up for when you're ready to change. You don't have to, but let's just explore what the next step might be. And then if you're at a 7 to 10, that means he's pretty much ready for change. So that's when you can say, all right, well, what might make you more successful? What would you have to do in order to be more successful when you're ready to change? I think I love this question. This one is the readiness ruler is really, really helpful. What do I usually use? Yeah, I usually get, I guess I use the readiness ruler a lot, and I say, well, what might get in your way? If you're an 8 or a 9, like, oh, okay, that's actually pretty high. What might prohibit you from meeting your goals? And then they can talk about, the things that might get in their way, or what might make that a little stronger. And they can talk about what might help them be more successful. Like a parent might help them out, or trying a new strategy. Okay. Number 8, exploring goals and values. Okay, so you want to know what your client's values and goals in life are. So if your kiddo really values independence, and so they really don't want your help, you can talk about, well, what do you want in life? Well, okay, well, I want to be independent, so I want to live on my own, and I want to get an apartment, and I want to make sure that, I'm not living, I'm far away from here. And then from there, you can actually help them understand that if they want independence, they just need a little support in order to get to that independence. but you want to constantly bring it back to their values in life and make sure that their goals are relevant to their life and don't interfere with anything. Okay, so do we have any questions? I know I just gave you a boatload of information. We're gonna utilize these skills. I found a cartoon on the internet, love the internet, that breaks down the process into step-by-step skills. And so we're gonna all just practice sharing our responses to this. But don't worry, they're all they're anonymous. Okay, any questions before I move on? Okay, here we go. So we have a clinician and a client. The client says, "I'm such a coward. I couldn't find the strength to speak up in class." If this was your client, can you come up with a script to reflect a reflection that demonstrates empathy? And you can make this quick. We don't have to, I know it's a script, but I just want like a statement or something like that. So how could you meet your child, your client, and reflect with empathy from this statement? Good. All right, awesome. I like this one. It sounds like you're really bummed out that you couldn't speak up in class. What did you want to say? I like this bummed out. That's good. Oh, speaking up can be stressful and tough. That's good. It must have been hard. Awesome. What would you say to a friend? Awesome. Okay, good. All right. I think I have everybody. I'm not sure unless other people are. Yeah, I think I have all these. Good. All right. So now we're going to go to acceptance. Every time I try to speak, my throat closes up. I tremble and no sound seems to come out. So now you, as the clinician, would say, script something to normalize the situation. Try to normalize that. Does that make sense?
Judi, am I an idiot? How do I get to the Pear Deck?
Uh-oh. Is this Jeremiah?
Yes.
I just joined and I just looked up Pear Deck. I did like Pear Deck join on Google and then I typed in the EKD RYB and it like slowly let me in. That helps.
Do you see the password at the top?
Yes. Yep. Got
Oh,
it.
so you probably thought you were in it because you're watching it. Now I understand. Right, so we're going to go to normalizing. I completely understand that. It has happened to me before. That happens a lot when people have to speak up. This is good. That's it. This is good. So it happens to me. You can tell a quick story about happening to someone else. Definitely want to make it short and sweet, but we're normalizing. You guys definitely get this. Awesome. I'm just going to move ahead just for time's sake. I don't want to keep you guys here too late. Okay. I would love it if I could find a way to stay calm in the moment. I think that I might be able to say something, but who am I kidding? Write a response that reflects back to the targeted behavior. This is when we really get into motivational interviewing. So now we're going to listen to what he's saying, and we want to target the change. This one might be tricky for folks because we didn't really give a lot of examples, but we're targeting the change talk. There we go. It sounds like you really want to find a way to be able to speak up. Good. You might use the word strategy or tool, talking about, awesome. Sounds like you might have ideas for what you could do to stay calm. Very good. Calm way to communicate. Good. You guys got this. Awesome. All right. That's exactly how I feel. You really get me. Write a response that draws from their thoughts and experiences. So obviously you haven't been talking to this person, just make something up. What would be a calming tool that this person might be talking to you about? Talking about clamping up, my throat's clamping up now. So from your resources, what might a client say? Oh, Jeremiah has joined us, hasn't he? I can spot a Jeremiah answer.
Sarcasm helps to break the ice.
Of course it does. We've missed you. All right. So this time we were looking for strategies. What would let's create a strategy together. So good. So talking about maybe something like, so like you like to take deep belly breaths. You've heard about that. Calms the nervous system. So think about those kinds of things. What a client might be saying. I know that one wasn't as specific, but you want to really get together and figure out those change moves. Talking about it together, that's good. All right, it was easier before. I didn't always worry about saying the wrong thing. So now we're going to write a statement that builds confidence. Write a statement. So statements are periods. Try to stay away from questions. We want to build confidence. There we go. All right. I'm seeing some good things. So you've done this before. That's great. I bet you can do it again. Like it. Oh, oops, sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I feel like you guys were working on that one. Here we go. All right. Let's figure this out. It will get easier with practice. That's it. Let's figure out how we can get those skills. We know you have them. We just have to get them back to the surface. That's it. Good. You have a charismatic way of explaining things. You just need to find the right strategy and practice. Good. I'm just going to move on for time's sake. Thank you, guys. All right. So motivation for action. I think I can do this. Write a closing that reinforces the targeted behavior and encourages autonomy. So we're going to close. We're going to reinforce the targeted behavior and encourage autonomy. All right, I like this. You can put anything you can do anything you put to your mind and then follow that up with the change behavior. So if whoever is writing that first one, make sure you add something about the behavior that they're going to show to change. There we go. You can absolutely utilize the tools you've already started using. And if you stick to your game plan this week, you'll find yourself in success. Good. Even naming the strategy that you use. So for example, when I did this, I was talking about deep belly breaths. So for example, it would be like, all right, you can totally do this. When you go to participate, just think about using those deep belly breaths and think those calming thoughts, or have that statement like, I can do this. I know I can do this. So you want to re-emphasize what you are trying to have the client do when they want to participate. Does that make sense? So just mentioning that strategy once again. Okay. I have this as a tool. You can print this out. It is the cheat sheet for everything motivational interviewing. So this is, or you can just find this one online, but I found this one was really good. It has everything. We didn't get to all the parts. We got to almost everything in motivational interviewing.